Okay, an introduction to introduction. You know, your intros are typically one of the most important parts of your paper, if not the, just because in the real world, people aren't going to read your writing if they're turned off by your introduction. I don't know how many of you guys read news online, but that's where I get most of my news now, whether it's newspapers or entertainment or what sports, whatever. You know, I open up a lot of tabs and I just start reading the story, and once it's lost my interest, I close and move on. It's rare that I finish an entire story. Okay, so your writing, you really want to, grab somebody's attention. Okay, and this goes back to knowing your audience and what you're going to be doing and what they want and what they're expecting when they find your reading. But there are several ways to go about and grasp their attention. Okay, and today's PowerPoint is just a kind of a brief little introduction, introduction into introductions. It's a nice little survey. Okay, so along with the title of your paper and such, your introduction, it's the first words they read. Okay, which seems obvious and shouldn't be mentioned, but it's important because it could also set the tone. When we look at your analytical paper, those 6 or 7 different essays that you can read, a lot of those essays you probably got a little bit of a chuckle from. Like, oh, that's an interesting title. And it kind of starts to paint a picture as to what that paper is going to be about. Now that's talking about just titles, but your intro works kind of the same way. So keep that in mind. And it also proposes a map for your readers. You're kind of explaining in your thesis at the end of your intro, it's what's coming up. What should we expect? Okay, what should we expect in reading your paper? The first type is a paradoxical or an intriguing statement. Okay, these are things to include towards the very beginning of your introduction. All of these things are meant to kind of catch people's attention, but also hold that attention throughout the rest of your paper. You want to keep them intrigued. You want to throw your best material right at the very beginning. You don't want to give that golden nugget that you are going to focus on, or you have a really good analysis on, or whatever. You don't want to give that away at the top. But yet you want to grasp them a little bit, maybe with a little saying. The picture versus 1,000 words and such. Some other statements. Okay. An arresting statistic or shock, something that'll kind of catch them off guard. Like, wow, really? That's true? Nearly 200 citizens were arrested as witches during the Salem witch scare of 1692. Eventually, 19 were hanged and another was pressed to death. Do you recall from your Crucible reading what pressing? The set stones, and just put more and more weight until you can't breathe and you suffocate, unless you just get crushed before that. But those are interesting stats. Some of you may be shocked by them, others maybe not. The Pentagon has twice as many bathrooms as are necessary. That's weird. Now, I want to caution you that you just don't throw out, no matter what article you're writing, you just throw out that Pentagon line. That doesn't do much if you're going to talk about fishing or foreign relations or sport. You know what I mean? You want to make your statistic applicable to what you're going to talk about, but still kind of catch them off guard a bit. And it gives a little bit of additional background information on the Pentagon. Putting in a quotation or a literary allusion. Remember from your lit classes, an allusion is when you refer to other information, places or people or other books or movies, things that you expect the reader of your paper to know, so that they can have a bigger or greater understanding of that particular info. So that's the allusion. So putting in something like that, maybe a nice quotation from somebody, These are all, and you don't have to do all of these intros in one intro. It's just, these are different ideas to include in your intro if you're looking for some flavor or some spice to add to your writing. Because some people are, I just don't know how to start, so I just started writing. Well, here are some nice little ways to kind of help you out. Someone once asked Edison, how can you feel good about your work, having failed 999 times to make a light bulb? To this, Edison replied, I have not failed so many times. I have merely learned 999 ways not to make a light bulb. Okay? So an interesting statement, an interesting quote that would then provide you a nice little springboard to provide commentary and analyze on that, make a connection into what you want to talk about. The sky's the limit. But this is where additional time spent pre-writing, additional time spent maybe researching in order to figure out what it's going to look like in your intro. It's not just, I'm just going to start writing. Take that extra time to push it to the next level. Putting in a relative story, joke, or anecdote, another name for a short story or anecdote, some little snippet to catch our attention. Okay? Maybe putting in a little joke here or there. This slide is probably the most obvious of any of the slides, just because you know jokes and you've seen and probably recognize the short stories as you have done much of your reading. And this one, talking about leads into To Kill a Mockingbird and stuff. A description often used for emotional appeal. Okay, so grasping onto the emotional quality of these, these things, and you can spend time reading these individually. A factual statement or a summary of who, what, when, where, and why. So kind of, we had the stats or shocking ones earlier. This one is more just, even though those were facts and such, more common, down-to-earth facts that someone might find interesting. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare's tragedy of star-crossed lovers destroyed by the blood feud between their two families, the minor characters. You see how he kind of gave a nice little summary of that, very quick, very to the point? Because whatever you're going to talk about in the rest, now people have a good background. Pretty much everybody reads that as freshmen, but if you read something 4 years later, 10, 20 years later, how much do you actually recall of Romeo and Juliet? So a nice little quick summation, summary of it is helpful a little bit. In the early 1990s, a newly independent Ukraine seeking to revive and reform its troubled economy embarked on a major privatization effort. The effort largely failed. So we are giving some facts of what's going on, okay, but also what happened to kind of not necessarily educate people, but just kind of enlighten them as to what's going to be, what they need to know going the rest of the way. Putting in some sort of an analogy or a contrast. To climb a mountain, a person must struggle and strain, and this is the case with any worthwhile goal. Personal experience. Okay, this would all determine whether or not you can, put yourself in the writing. Research papers and such, you might want to be a little bit careful, including things like this. But when I trained for my first marathon, it was difficult and often painful. But I wanted to have the accomplishment of running 26.2 miles, so I did it anyways. To make progress in life requires sacrifice. And you can imagine that the rest of the paper is that last sentence. Talking about, preaching about, making sacrifices for what you want and blah, blah, blah. And by you establishing early on that, you've done this before, maybe it gives a little bit of credibility, but it shows that, you might know a little bit about what you talk about. So, a statement of a problem or a popular misconception. Showing people what you thought was one thing might be something else. Americans too often take their rights for granted. We hardly ever stop to think about all of the hard work that was involved in gaining the rights we enjoy under the Constitution. This Constitution was not ratified overnight. It took many years and a great amount of persuasion through a document called the Federalist Papers to get the states to accept the Constitution. So, you see how it's kind of taking what people maybe take for granted and it kind of quickly re-educates you on the situation to show you how people take things for granted in this particular instance. Okay, but in essence, here's what really happened. It wasn't something that was just boom, done overnight. This took much debate, discussion, and argument over multiple years in order to get it to work. And so that's one of the examples of how you can, contradict a problem or a misconception and help out. You know, you've probably heard of these rhetorical questions. Questions that, the speaker imagines that you're answering in your mind. It's not one of those raising your hands, I know the answer. It's, you're expected to know it. Okay, so dropping in a rhetorical question here or there. You know, how is it possible that as late as the mid-20th century in the United States, the land of the free, riders on public buses were segregated by race? It's not expecting an answer for you, but yet you can see how that should get the ball rolling with regards to what they want to talk about. Okay, so there are a lot of these different types. Okay, this is a wonderful PowerPoint to just jump back to and to see concrete examples of what each of these is, especially the ones that you might struggle with because you haven't done before, that type of thing. We're going to have an activity where you try writing 2 different intros, and we're going to focus on that more block day. But take a look and try one of these. It doesn't matter which one, to put in an introduction, and then you can try another one. It says try again, but we're not going to do a third one, just the 2. Okay, but you can see all of the different types and go back to this PowerPoint and just familiarize yourself with that and start to think about what kind of an introduction would maybe work for you. What are you comfortable in doing? Okay, so those are your introductions.